Welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time since the opening keynotes this morning. You are in the Plaza Terrace room, which I'm kind of going to assume that means you're interested in hearing from Shana Glover around the adaptive change and having the resilience we were just talking about, the resilience to keep innovation projects alive. Now, Shana's one of those people who I've kind of glimpsed at a couple of times across rooms. We feel like we've had a conversation, we're not entirely sure. She's also one of those ridiculous overachievers. She has degrees in both chemical engineering and science, and she holds a PhD in chemical engineering. She is an ex-executive leader at BHP and has worked in the resources sector for the past 20 years. Not worked, or worked is what I was about to say. What I'm really loving about my quick conversations already with Shana is that she's passionate about assisting others with their leadership development, and she actively shares her learnings with women to accelerate their careers. I don't know whether that's been a theme for some of the speakers that you've seen today, but it's certainly been the theme in this room. One of the things that I thoroughly enjoyed, though, with a little bit of digging, is that in addition to all of the professional accomplishments, Shana spends her life between here and Phoenix. When she's here, she spends her life between Brisbane CBD and a property out near Bow Desert. In addition to her husband and her 3 kids, the thing that she probably likes the most is her dressage horses. It's not something that you come across every day. So would you please welcome Dr. Shana Glover to the stage.
Oh, the lights are very, very bright. I can hardly see people in the audience. Thank you really very much, Kat, for the warm introduction to Hopper Down Under. So BHP is very proud to be a sponsor of this event. When Sue contacted me, I think it might be a year ago, Sue, we were looking to secure the support of AnitaB.org to actually help us host and put their brand behind what would be a Brisbane Women in Technology conference. So in BHP, myself and Lauren Stafford were really, really keen to get behind provide a letter of support. We didn't know how it would go. I don't think Sue spoke about this story this morning. We actually thought we had no chance coming from Little Down Under to actually get AnitaB.org behind us. But, BHP was very, very keen to provide that letter of support. And for me, it's been a journey that particularly people like Sue and her organising committee have done so much over the last year. Anita B clearly did actually get our application and actually awarded the conference down here and have come behind us to support this event. So it has been a journey of well and truly a year to get to where we are today. So I'm going to say we are here. So before I kick off, I would like to say a quick few words about BHP, mainly because I know not everybody in the audience knows actually even who BHP is. There's people from international aren't familiar with the company and its brand. So BHP, we own and operate, basically we've got commodities in mining and in oil and gas. We specialise in the large and the long life, low cost, expandable type areas of mining. What I really like about BHP, clearly I'm Australian, can usually tell by my accent. We were incorporated in 1885. So today we are recognised as a global natural resources company. We are number 1 in the world for resources, but we actually started in very humble beginnings in Broken Hill. So as I said, I really associate well with the company because I'm a pretty proud and passionate Australian. What we operate is commodities in iron ore, metallurgical coal, copper, and oil and gas as well. So for those who aren't familiar, I think Elsaby did a good intro last night. Mining has really laid the building blocks of society as we know it today. Your mobile phone, everyone's got one, has copper within it. We have steel within our cars, and it will be our driverless cars in the future, as you will hear within my talk. And nickel, we have a nickel business as well, and the future of batteries is going to be very critical for our move to an electric world. So these are just some of the resources that BHP provides to support 21st century growth. So the resources industry has, for me been, which is why the title of my talk, it's a really cyclical industry. It has lots of ups and lots of downs. As really Kat said at the start, I have been in the industry for 20 years. The fact it's cyclical is a little out of our control. Supply and demand, as we've seen developing countries come on board, called BRIC, the Brazil, the Russia, the India and the China, they really do drive very big highs and very big lows in the industry. And I guess what I want to try and share a little bit today is around how do you lead innovation when you have particularly ups and downs? We have had times where really technology has not been front of centre in our business, where we've really been, fighting for cash flow and, being able to make money out of our operations. And then we have times where it's a boom cycle. So, as I said, some of the things I'm going to talk about today really are, I hope they're helpful. They really are my learnings from trying to lead innovation in what is a really cyclical industry. But I think you'll find with my themes, it's not just because I work in mining. Any type of change that you are going to try and lead, you are all wonderful technologists. Technology is tough. It is much harder to lead change, I believe, in technology than in HR or any of the other areas within the business. And that is because what I'm going to talk a little bit about now is really around adaptive change. And you saw that in my title. So as technologists, we're really good at the technical change, me included as an engineer. But when it comes to adaptive change, it's a really different approach to change we have to take. So technical change is defined as, those problems that can be solved by the knowledge of experts, whereas adaptive change actually requires new learning. So as I said, the problem really with the way we lead projects, I find, is often that we only think about the technical change, not the actual adaptive change that goes with it. So that new learning is really critical. And for me, one of the things I'd like to impart to you is it really does start at your own level. You need to be comfortable that you are going to be learning every day on the job. I lead large teams, as Kat said, global teams. I have people reporting to me in all over the world, including I have an autonomy test bed that we're doing development work in Arizona. So you're always going to be learning on the job. I cannot, even with degrees and a PhD, I can't possibly know what it is, the great smarts in the people around me who are going to help me actually deliver this change. The other thing I find is very much with the leadership level, or call it the executive level in your organisation, is that they're going to have to get on a learning journey too. And probably what I found the hardest, and is that you need a bit of resilience to actually get them on the journey of the amount of change, particularly if it's very step change. They're going to have to actually move into that learning mode as well. And I guess one of the famous kind of quotes I like from people who work in this field is that you must remember that leadership is an activity. It's not a role. I think people always say to me in the organisation, oh, I'm not at a leadership level, or everybody's leaders. You are all leaders. You're all trying to drive your own technology agenda. But as I said, adaptive change is challenging, mainly because it comes, in conflict with the role of authority, which is normally what people know about leadership, which is I'm going to be directive, I have the authority, I am going to tell you what to do, and you're going to follow and do the work. Adaptive change, and all my experience you'll see in leading step change technology in the resources sector, that's probably the thing I've learnt the most about, is that you can lead, even though you may not have big teams of people around you, or you may not be at the executive level. And one of my other favourite quotes that I recently heard is you must learn to dance on the edge of your authority. Anyone who knows me in BHP knows that I do that. I'm not sure I do it well, and that is something you have to become comfortable with, because organisations, no matter where you are, will try to put you in a box, and you need to be comfortable that you actually have to push outside of that box to actually deliver. So for my connection with BHP, it goes back to 2002. I was really lucky to be given the opportunity at that time to travel to India. I was reviewing the steel mill capability in the country, and I flew in to, and then we travelled actually by car from Goa up to the border of Pakistan. And what I saw, I was a green chemical engineer. I hadn't been that long out of my PhD. I was only used to wonderful living conditions that we have in Australia. I'd been to America and Europe. For me, that was the first time we were in very outback India. Saw the wonderful spirit of Indian people, particularly children who had nothing. They really lived in poverty conditions. And for me, I really started to make the connection between resources and resourcing the future. That was the company I was working for, and how do I actually make sure that the resources in mining companies become available to people to help them up out of the poverty conditions that they are in, because we have all benefited from those resources, and they need to too. So one of the things I want to really leave you with is that is my North Star. For 20 years it hasn't changed. It's really important, I think, if you want to lead your change and be resilient, you actually have to find your own North Star. So we spoke a little bit actually last night with Elsaby. One of the other, and you can hear through my talk, while I'm an engineer, very passionate about people. One of the things I've noticed as we've gone through, we've led a project such as the integrated remote operating centres here in Brisbane. We've got these centres all around the globe now. Is that you have to put people change management within your project from a really early stage. You can't just lead the technology. I'm an engineer. I'm no good at organisational change management, but I bring in people who specialise in that field. So they're not, generally technologists. These are people who specialise in organisational change. So the integrated remote operating centres that we've put in place in BHP, they really drive a step change in safety and productivity. The other thing I worked out really early on is that we wanted to drive cultural change and diversity change through the remote operating centres. So these all operate at 50% gender diversity. We were really proactive that we wanted to do that from the start. So you can hear that while there was great technology behind being able to control our operations that are in, be it in the Pilbara, we control them out of Perth. For here in Queensland, they're up in the Bowen Basin, and in Santiago, we control them in different locations in Chile. So, but I recognised I was really fortunate to be able to lead the study from the start, and I recognised early that there was no point me just solving the technology. If we didn't help people with the change management and bring people on the journey, we wouldn't succeed. So I've really, I suppose as I've gone on, I've recognised that you never fail in your organisation due to technical change. You will always fail on the people change, and that's often, the technology can be great, but the people change will give you a showstopper. The other thing about the remote operating centres that people often like to hear from me is I had my first go at it in 2004, and this one in Brisbane actually it's been going about 18 months now. I had 3 goes at getting the Brisbane remote operating centre up. And I think that's just a sign of you have to be resilient. If you really are someone who has a vision for where you want to take your company or your research institute, you just have to be resilient, and you're going to get knockbacks. You're going to get people who don't understand where you want to take, the group or where you see the future. And that's fine. You've just got to know to kind of regroup. I've certainly spent my time licking my wounds thinking, oh, why do people just not get it? But you've just got to stick with it. And after 3 attempts and really over a decade, we managed to get the remote operating centre up in Brisbane. So the other thing I'm going to talk a little bit about is, really around the role of technology. It's getting so much more important in every corporation. So for us in BHP, vehicle-related incidents actually account for 1/4 of our significant incidents. So, and sadly, we have killed people in our industry. So for me, I spoke a little bit about, I guess, my North Star. Anytime I move on to a project, I've been working in the autonomy space for about 2 years now. My sense of purpose is something that if I don't have, I can't lead that team and lead the change we actually require. So for me on this project, automation is critical. I mean, heavy machinery and people just don't mix. That's how we get our incidents. Obviously, we have, as I said, fatalities, but also long-term health impacts from people driving heavy machinery. So my actual, what gets me up out of bed every day is the fact that I know if I can lead an acceleration of autonomy in our industry, I'm going to keep our people safe. So sense of purpose. Please remember that, because as you lead your teams, people say to me, I don't know, Shana, how you do it every day, but gee, we just want to kind of follow you. It's because your passion will be aligned with your sense of purpose. And as I said, people will go places with you that you never thought were possible. So the other thing, particularly in the role I've been working on over the last couple of years, is to recognise very much the skills and capability that we're going to need within Australia or Chile to operate autonomy. We need to increase the level of skills that are available to us. So Australia, and I'm sure this came from Sue's robotics roadmap, has approximately 0.6 robots per 1,000 employees, and that is compared to OECD average of 1.6. So I'm really passionate about the opportunity for Australia. We have some of the best field robotics capability, particularly here in southeast Queensland, between QUT, CSIRO and UQ. So for me, it is something that we really need to build upon. Our rate of adoption, people are always surprised when I say this. I was talking about it at lunch. In the mining industry, we were the first to lead lead automation. So that was back in 1997. The first automated trucks actually started to have a trial in some of our bauxite industry in Western Australia. And what we've seen is the road-going autonomy sector has really accelerated in the past 4 years. I'm sure, being technical people, you always follow the journey of road-going autonomy. So what I've found is mining, while we led the way, we are falling behind. The solutions are not good enough, their quality is not there, and we suffer production losses because of it. So one of the work I've been doing is really around partnerships. And from our sessions this morning, I heard some great comments in the same vein. One of the things that is so important as a leader is that if you can recognise and have the humility and the vulnerability. They're two key words that I talk about with my teams all the time. Humility, vulnerability. If you recognise that you're not going to solve this on your own, you will straight away start working on building really strong partnerships. So some of the work we are doing within my team is how do we partner with other companies outside of our own industry. We are finding, so for those who are seeking exciting careers, I think the time has never been better. Your ability to take your digital skill set and move from resources to space, to university is there now for you. I have never seen. You used to have a lot of domain knowledge you needed, whereas now digital knowledge actually breaks down the barriers. So I'm really proud to have started the Queensland industry-led robotics cluster. We're working heavily with government. We have oil and gas sitting together with mining, space, Boeing, and then we have our wonderful field robotics research capability here in southeast Queensland, and well supported by the government. So this is really a great way, not only obviously for mining and the resources area to future-proof ourselves against a move to a robotics capability, but really I'm passionate about future-proofing the opportunity for Australia in the robotics space. So the only other thing I wanted to close on is a lot of people asked me last night, what are the couple of things you find, and I've added this into my speech, that you find are a challenge for women, particularly in corporations? There's two things I want to call out: work-life harmony, and the other one is a sense of community. I think these are both things that we're getting wrong, and I work hard in our organisation to try and improve them. I don't talk about work-life balance. Misnomer. There's no balance. I can guarantee you what you need to do is flex your weeks based on what's important at the time, and that's really all I do with my health, my family, my work, and obviously my passion for sport. So, no week is going to look the same, so that's the only advice I had for you. And the other one really is around sense of community. I think women really seek that feeling of community. I think your time is so ripe now. Organisations are operating very matrix functional models. I have no idea actually what that means or how to get it to work. I'm not a HR person. I translate it: tribal. It's tribal. Go tribal. And I think women are really, really good at acting tribal. You know what everyone's working on. You're very, very good at bringing people together. And I actually think it's why we're struggling in a lot of corporations at the moment, because it is a skill set that, I really think if we can get to 50-50 gender, we certainly will have more success with. So the other thing I just wanted to finish on is certainly BHP, our wonderful CEO, Andrew Mackenzie, many years ago committed to 50-50 by 2025. I don't know how we'll get there unless it's for people in the room who are going to help us, for companies like BHP, to achieve that target. So as I said, please remember, be authentic, act with humility, be vulnerable, share your stories, and enjoy the journey as well. Thanks.
Thank you. So we do have time for one long question, two quick ones. So let's see how we go. So if you've got a question, pop your hand up. We'll bring a microphone to you. I think there was some absolute gold in there around leadership, particularly around that need for all of us, but particularly women, to embrace our sense of community. Any questions? I'm happy to ask it myself.
Go for it.
Why do women struggle to tap into that community when it is our natural? We do it personally. We do it when we're raising our kids and whatnot. Why do we struggle in the professional context?
Yeah, I think, Kat, really what I find with women, and I always encourage them to do, is just take the licence, be it on, if and this isn't everyone, these things are always generalisations, but if you are a tribal person and you like to create community, go and do it. As I said, the organisation needs you to do it. Work-life harmony, same thing. Don't look for a policy or, talking to, your line manager about how it will work. They say that, but frankly, if they're a male, they probably, no offence to the men in the room, they probably don't have a lot of experience in it. So I think what you need to do is take the licence. It took me a while to work that out in my career. I certainly did it tough for the first 10 years, trying to be all things to all people. And then I got to the point I was just like, I'm just going to do it. And you wait to see, whether someone says that that's not within the boundaries or the policy, and I've never found it. You will find you will deliver more and more because you are working in your sweet spot. So I tend to encourage women, just take the licence on both those areas.
Seek forgiveness, not ask permission.
Exactly.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please thank again Dr. Shana Glover.
Beautiful. Thank you, lovely lady.
So our next speaker is a Niimba woman. Her name is Susan Beatson, and her research focuses on the First Peoples co-design methods in human-computer interaction. I don't think it gets juicier than that. Her PhD researched the kinship systems to extend networking theory as a basis for the design of culturally effective tech. If you're keen to tweet her live, you can find her by searching for Susan Beatson on Twitter, and you'll find that her handle is SooGB, as in SOOJEEBEE. Of course, if you are live tweeting, the hashtags are Hopper Down Under, and we are here. Would you please welcome to the stage Susan Beatson.
The lights are very bright. Hey everybody, thanks for being here. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal people, the Yagara and the Turrbal peoples, the traditional custodians of these lands that we're on today, and the Nunakal peoples as well, who are from the island across the waters. I want to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and to the future. And also to anybody here, all of your elders, and to mine as well. I think this was said this morning in one of the keynotes that these have always been places of learning, and we do continue in that tradition today. And I was really impressed to hear that someone was speaking along those lines. So this is a bit of an outline of what I'm going to address. I won't get to all of these, so I will. I'll touch on them, but I'll just move fairly quickly through. So ITCD squared, Indigenous tech, co-design and co-development. Some people problematise the words co because from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, that's continuing non-Aboriginal people doing technology for Aboriginal people. And what I say is we're all people and we all have differences, and we should be celebrating all of our differences. So even myself as a Niimba woman, I've left country and living in Brisbane now, and I chose to be educated, and I chose to live off country. So when I go home, there's still a difference, and anything that I do on country or in other people's countries, there is a difference. So I thought long and hard about that, and I still think it's important to consider co-design and co-development. Additionally, what we have is for 230 years in this country, 240 years, we've had non-Aboriginal people doing things and determining things for Aboriginal people and Aboriginal knowledges in this tech space. So what is important for us to understand is that it's still, while that is changing and Aboriginal people are doing it for ourselves, there is still a continuing relationship, and co-design and co-development is still critical for the next perhaps 20 years. So to this methodology, there's two core components. It's about the co-design and about the co-development, but it's underpinned by what Phillips named as Indigenist standpoint theory. Indigenist standpoint theory is about understanding the historical, institutional and social dimensions that impact Aboriginal people's lives, and about how you, as a tech designer or as a person, understand that. And so it's about our hidden bias and what we impose on Aboriginal people when we create systems with Aboriginal people and about Aboriginal knowledges. I want to just mention too that I keep saying Aboriginal. As a Niimba woman, I come from a town that is a mission town, and because my father married an Irish woman, and because my father was Aboriginal, as a Niimba and Wiradjuri Wiradjuri and Nimbah man, we weren't actually allowed to live in the town. We lived on the river. And so that town has a lot of history in relation to missions. A lot of people were moved into that town or into the mission, and a number of generations went by, many, and some people don't actually know who their mob are. So if we know who we are, we like to claim that. If we don't know who we are, on my country, we call ourselves Aboriginal. I am a Wiradjuri and a Nimbah woman, but there are a lot of people on my country that don't know who they are, and we've had a long association with my people on my country, so we honour that. In Queensland, because we have a lot of Torres Strait Islander people have influenced the culture here in Queensland, we've adapted to and adopted the word Indigenous. So Phillips, as an Indigenous woman, has framed or coined the term Indigenist standpoint. And that means anyone, like feminist standpoint, you don't have to be female to be a feminist. The same with Indigenous standpoint, you don't have to be Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander or a First Nations person internationally to be an Indigenous researcher or designer or developer. But Indigenous standpoint really asks us to think about those dimensions. It's the social dimensions. You, as a developer, you need to think about how you consider and think about Aboriginal people. What happened? What was said at the kitchen table and the kitchen table logic when you, what we call the kitchen table logic, when the word Aboriginal came up? Did you use did your family or aunties or uncles or cousins use racial words? Sorry, I was just thinking of some, but I'd rather not say them. What happens in the institutions when you think about how many Aboriginal people are employed alongside you? I know that for me at school, my cousins who are a lot darker than me, one of them was made to go outside all the time and pick up the rubbish, while all of us had to have our heads checked for nits. It was only some of us that were sent outside to pick up the rubbish. So then we need to think historically what happens and what we know about why we think the way we do. So if we've been told in the newspapers, when you see a story about Aboriginal people, there's often an advertisement for alcohol. And that's that subliminal message that gets told to you in those sort of institutional, in the newspapers, dimensions. And we need to understand why those are the way they are. And if you think about the political dimensions, historical dimensions, we talk about Aboriginal people were once a part of, we wonder why Aboriginal people do drink. I don't drink. My father didn't drink for a long, long, long time before he passed. My mother's Irish and she does drink and still drinks. I'm often told, Susan, sit down and have a drink with us. But we wonder why Aboriginal people drink. We were named as part of the White Australia policy, we were named, there was a policy called, an act called the Opium, Prohibition of the Sale of Opium and Aboriginal Act, Aboriginal Protectionist Act. No, just Aboriginal Act, that's right. So what that means is that we were making it a white Australia and we were bringing down the sale of opium, so bringing down the Chinese people, and we were allowing farmers to pay Aboriginal people in opium. And it was usually just the ashes from the opium, apparently. So these are the sort of things that actually Aboriginal people are actually saying, oh, now I know why. My father used to say, alcohol doesn't become you, Susan. It was true. So it's just really important that we understand what these are. I've come from a co-design, a design, I was just happened to be one of those things where I always thought about people whenever I related to tech. My background was in datacoms and in IT management of networks. But I was always interested when we implemented a whole new ERP or new system, why change was so important to people. And it was always about people. So I was always interested, not actually then in the people and the technology, but what happened in that interface. And Martin Nakada calls that the cultural interface. So I'm saying to you, when you design systems, it's absolutely important. Even authors coming out of the States, non-Indigenous authors, like Virginia Eubanks, talks about designing systems that continue to oppress people. So there are a lot of people talking about it now. The other day I spoke with an elder where, because there's a lot of tech development at the moment where people are actually looking at developing systems for, whether that be an app or an online system in any shape or form, for Indigenous languages. And what we're actually doing is we're continuing the oppression in subtle ways. So we're actually removing Indigenous worldviews and we're imposing a Eurocentric worldview by teaching people a Northern West Australian language the way we speak English. And there's an elder there. I said to him, so who is the app for? Oh, it's not for us. It's for other people, for the white people. And so the funding that was taken to develop this app is funding in the bank of Aboriginal funding, but it's developed in a way that the language is taught the same as it is taught in the school, and everyone thinks it's great from an external perspective. This language is being taught in school, but the way it's being implemented is they're changing the structure of the language. Linguists have often had, well, not necessarily linguists, but yeah, linguists in particular, and anthropologists, it's come from that way of thinking as well, have a reductionist view, and we do as technologists have a reductionist view of data. I think of it as knowledge sovereignty and not data, because knowledge is power. And when it belongs to Aboriginal people, or Torres Strait Islander people, or First Nations peoples internationally, it is knowledge and it is power. But as soon as it gets taken away from us and put into systems, it becomes data. And it loses its connection, its relation to all that it means to Aboriginal people. So it's really important when we actually do create systems about Indigenous knowledges that we create them in a way that embraces all that comes with it. UNESCO have a system called, or not a system, but a document called technology transfer. And they talk about when we do a technology intervention in a developing country, we need to make sure that technology skills are transferred across. Instead of what happens here, we have a linguist or a developer or other technologists who come into a community, maybe for 1 week or 2 one-week periods, and extract knowledge and become experts in creating digital technologies for Indigenous knowledges. The experts in the community have handed up their expertise, but nothing has come back. Although everyone thinks that they've created a technology for those people. You heard the story about the elder, where it's not developed for the people at all. They then have more work to do to teach people that they're learning the wrong way. So I consider Australia to be a continent of over 500 developing countries. So you have to think along those lines, despite what the political talk is, which is that we are a first, what's the word for first country? We're a developed country, sorry. So I think what you need to do when you work with Indigenous knowledges, and all of us, we need to see the innovation. My supervisor, Janet Wiles, said the other day that we've been doing technology for many, many years, and we learnt the old way. And now we know that there are much smarter ways to teach it. So there are really, quick and easy ways to teach people certain things. We're not asking people in community to have degrees. So we need to see the excellence and innovation. IndigiHack is a hackathon that is on in a couple of weeks' time with Indigenous youth. We're actually getting Indigenous youth from schools from all over Australia and coming together and with mentors and getting them to ideate and create prototypes of something for, not necessarily a technology, but an application of some kind. And then the winner of that will get $10,000 and will also go into the National Centre of Indigenous Excellence to incubate their idea. So that's where we're going with that. I forgot to flick the slides, sorry about that. So that's what co-development is about, the technology transfer. And it's about not assuming, know your biases. The one thing that ITCD does do is it operationalises Langton's 3 categories of intersubjectivity, which is about an Aboriginal person interacting with other Aboriginal peoples. So always make sure that you actually have Aboriginal people on the team and that you're actually conversing with Aboriginal people. That you're ensuring, that facilitating that Aboriginal people are conversing with each other. That's critical because I think Celeste this morning talked about going into Aboriginal communities and actually acknowledging that it's about building relationships. And Aboriginal people do that better with Aboriginal people than non-Aboriginal people. Only because of a shared commonality. It's about stereotyping and iconising and mythologising Aboriginal peoples, and about Aboriginal people as non-Aboriginal people enter into a paradigm with each other that produces mutual testing models in order to find a space for mutual comprehension. And that's critical, especially in this climate, the political climate now. It's about knowing, having an understanding, a shared understanding. So building those relationships before, as Celeste said, you even get into thinking about what the outcomes are and what you're actually committed to doing. Whenever we build, with machine learning in particular, what we're looking at is expediting systems. What we need to know is that this culture still exists, especially in authentic speakers of language in particular. Traditional speakers still speak today what was spoken before colonisation in some communities. and others are learning, relearning from recordings. So it's absolutely critical, and because Aboriginal people have already know how to speak in a particular way with language, it's important that we actually have interventions, even if we are going to introduce machine learning into some of these components. We can easily take videos and work out how things should be said, but it's important for Aboriginal people to own that process. So I call that cultural validation, or that's something that we've coined out of Nimba community. We want to impose cultural validation on what happens with our systems. And that, for us, gives it cultural integrity. I've just got a couple of minutes. So what I want to say is that what it does is, what ITCD squared does is facilitates trust and transparency in technology. It does it from building relationships right at the very beginning. It does it so through communication, collaboration, and creating outcomes that benefit the Aboriginal peoples that you're working with. And this is really about, one of my supervisors or one of my colleagues talks about situatedness and contextual design. But it's more than that. ITCD squared is about you as a designer or a developer looking at your own thoughts and the way you think and why you think the way you do. So that can be about people who are vision impaired. It can be about people who have other or have health difficulties or experiences. So it's about understanding those. It's about problematising language as well, which is critical in handing back the power. There was a couple of incidents recently where we spoke with a gamer who was developing a game and wanted to start with a white stage. It's about agency, allowing people to change the colour of the stage, of the animation. But it's also about when you walk in to an Aboriginal community with a blank model and refer to it as what it's known in the industry of design as a white model. Understand what you bring with that. And it's all about transforming lifelong learning. Thank you. That's my, I'm a Sangoana. Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much. Some beautiful takeaways in there about being so present to the assumptions that us whiteys just make because we don't think often. Thank you. Would you please put your hands together for Susan Beatson?